you're doing for us.
This is the sixth.
And
In
we have to have a meeting about this.
okay. To the next semester. We usually try to put that out on just a little bit. I want to let you know that the restrooms are located on this, just the other side of this wall.
Well, you might have to go.
okay, sounds good.
And I want to introduce our director of special education, Jackie Chapman. Hi, everybody. As Heather said, we have these research classes twice a semester, one each quarter. And so this evening's topic obviously is on dyslexia. I know that many of you might be parents with students on IEPs, and some of you may be parents just with students that have already been diagnosed with dyslexia, think they might have dyslexia. And so we're here tonight just to give you some information. I want to introduce our speaker tonight, Stacy Cates, and I want to give you a little bit of background about Stacy. Stacy lists herself as an SLPD doctoral student, which is true. She's in the doctoral program at KU in the SLP program. But I want to give you a little bit more information besides that. Stacy is actually a speech pathologist by trade. She has for sure worked in some public school settings. We actually met Stacy in several public school settings. I don't want it to sound like one. We actually met Stacy when Stacy was with the Speech and Language Clinic at Children's Mercy Hospital. Some of you may have already met Stacy through that clinic. You may be familiar with the clinic because you might have already taken your child there for evaluation and received a diagnosis of dyslexia. The school districts in Johnson County met with the speech clinic at Children's Mercy in regards to their evaluations and some of the recommendations that they were making from their evaluations, and collaborated with them so that they understood the school district's perspective as well as keeping their medical perspective. Stacy was part of that group. One of our coordinators, her name is Anjanette Tolman, who is a speech pathologist also by trade, worked closely with Stacy through that process. It was during that work in collaboration with Children's Mercy Hospital that we learned Stacy has her own speech and language company. It's called KC Pro.
Kansas City Speech Professionals.
That's it. Thank you. And so I contacted Stacy last year. She came into the district and started doing some training and in-service work with our staff to try to get us more up to speed on dyslexia. After having Stacy present a couple times, seeing her, consulting with her staff, I reached out to Stacy late spring and asked Stacy if she would be willing to become a consultant for Shawnee Mission School District. And that is what she's doing. She is very part-time. This is, as you know, a very large school district. And one person cannot do the work in every one of our buildings. So we're piloting some things in 6 of our elementary schools this year. The previous year we piloted some other things in some other schools. We are still doing that, and Stacy is actually working in the schools. She's not just primarily working with students on IEPs. That is not her purpose. She is there to help this buildings do early intervention. You may have already sat with her through a student improvement team meeting where the school had concern maybe about your child's movement improvements. We are wanting to move all of this forward. Our plans are for the summer to hold an institute and train staff members within our buildings, hopefully one staff member per building, so that we have at least one staff member per building up to speed on understanding dyslexia, diagnosing dyslexia, what it takes, now that we're going to be doing the diagnosis, what those components are, and also understand the appropriate interventions for those students. It is going to be more of a train-the-trainer model. So we're in the process of getting that formulated. Please know that dyslexia is not just special ed. Regular ed is also working in that. The curriculum and instruction department collaborates with us on that. Stacy's going to have help this summer during the institute from one of our school psychologists who also has experience down in Pittsburgh State. She helped work and ran a dyslexia clinic down in Pittsburgh, Kansas. And then one of our teachers, one of our LD teachers who was will be running the institute, and we will hope to be training individuals from every one of our elementary schools and our middle schools. So just that gives you a little bit, I wanted to give you a little bit of background of what Shawnee Mission is trying to do in the area of dyslexia. Again, I can't, our special ed department, our C&I department can't get everything up to speed in 1 year like that. This is a process. I think Christina Middleton, who is the president of the Shawnee Mission PTA, Shawnee Mission Special Ed PTA, knows the work that we've been doing, and we've got more work to do by all means, but we're trying. So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy. Stacy's presentation will probably last about 30 plus minutes, and then we'll be available to answer questions. Good? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jackie. So again, I'm Stacy, and like Jackie said, I have experience as a speech pathologist. I also taught prior to becoming a speech pathologist, and have a decent amount of background in education through parents and family. But as Jackie said, I've been within the district for the past year and getting to know a lot of the different buildings, and I'm just really enjoying it so far. So my hope here tonight is just to give you guys an overview of what dyslexia is, what it looks like, and how we can help those with dyslexia. Some of this may be very familiar to some of you, some of it may be new to some of you. But to start with, just what is it? What does it look like? And I like to start with what it's not, because I think there's a very common misconception that it's a visual problem, that it's seeing things backwards or seeing things reverse. And it's not. It's a difficulty breaking down the code of how to read and spell. So this is the very lengthy, wordy definition of dyslexia adopted by the International Dyslexia Association. I am going to read it word for word because I don't want to leave any out, because this is the definition. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities in the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So, breaking that down, that first part of it, neurobiological, what does that mean? So neurobiological is an illness of the nervous system that's caused by genetic, metabolic, and other biological factors. Some other illnesses of this nature, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, autism, other psychiatric disorders. Those are types of neurobiological disorders. The neurological component is the brain's pathways are actually different. They function differently. The genetic component or biological component, genetics, that there often are other family members who have dyslexia. It could be mom, dad. It could be grandparents. It could be way down the line that grandma or grandpa says, oh, my mom, my dad, or aunt or uncle really struggled to read but was so bright, and we just didn't know why. I wonder if that's what was going on. So some other potential factors. The external ones, just a limited early literacy experience, an insufficient or inadequate reading and writing instruction, insufficient oral language experience, Matthew effect, just lower expectations. School was hard for me, school's going to be hard for you, why should we try? Internal factors, again, are the genetic and that neurobiological piece. So as far as the structural differences, so talking about the neurological piece, there are atypical patterns of symmetry in the temporal lobe, presence of focal dysplasias in the cortex, differences in the corpus callosum, inferior parietal lobe, and the cerebellum. So these are the actual structural differences in the brain. Now the functional differences are, there's less left hemisphere dominance than you see in typical readers. There are also differences in activation, so over or under activation in various brain regions. So these are actual fMRI images of someone with dyslexia and someone without. So you can see the different shading here. I like to describe it as, I love looking at the imagery, but I like to describe it as a runner. Picturing a runner that is super fast, just does a sprint. Down the track, done, really fast, versus a runner that has to run all the way around that track. So for the first runner, it's just in, out, like super fast. The other one is capable and finishes, it's just different, and it takes longer. And even within that runner going around the track, some are better than others. Maybe they're great distance runners and they're able to, even though they run around the track, get there faster. Others may need to stop and take a breath, but they still get there. It just takes a little longer and is a little bit more difficult. So what are some other causes? And I think that these are things that a lot of times we hear and we just get confused, like what is it, what's going on? So the visual problems. There can be a visual component. If a child has, some reversal errors or issues with eye movement and, their eyes aren't tracking appropriately, can that impact their reading? Yes. Is that going to impact or affect the dyslexia? No. That's just an additional factor that can make it very difficult to read. Attention-based deficits. Children that really struggle to attend, they're already struggling to retain a lot of the information they're being taught. So if they're having a significant difficulty learning to read because of the dyslexia and really having a hard time breaking down that code, and then we add in maybe they're only getting bits and pieces of what's being said, then that just compounds the issue. But again, will fixing that fix the other? No, it's just another component that's making it difficult for them. Same thing for auditory processing deficits. And this, if you can't read in the back, is just saying that research findings are very inconsistent in regard to auditory processing deficits on how much they contribute, if they contribute, exactly what's going on where that's concerned. It's a very hard area to research. There's some great researchers out there right now really trying to get into it, but it's very hard to tell if it's the language or the actual processing of the language. So that's just a little blurb saying research is very inconsistent, but it could be a contributing factor. So some common misconceptions. That smart people can't be dyslexic. That is completely inaccurate. The first piece to diagnosing dyslexia is proving that there is at least adequate intelligence. So if a child does not have adequate, or an individual does not have adequate intelligence, it's not dyslexia. So that right there is disproving that common misconception. That people with dyslexia can't read. Again, that's a very big misunderstanding. Children with dyslexia or individuals with dyslexia can read. It's just difficult. It's effortful. It's hard. Children with dyslexia see and write letters backwards. We covered that one. Some kids do, but it's actually very typical up until about second grade. Dyslexia can be cured. Again, if we go back to that definition of the neurobiological piece, it can't be cured. Yes, if we detect and we intervene early, the symptoms or the side effects of dyslexia can be so minor and we don't notice it as much or they don't have as many difficulties, but it's not something that can be cured. It will be there. That wearing certain glasses or using different fonts will help those with dyslexia read. So again, back to that visual component. Could there be a visual issue or a visual concern that the child could need glasses or an overlay or fonts for? Possibly. But that will not help what is going on with dyslexia. That is really learning and figuring out how to break down that code. Dyslexia is more common in boys. There are several research studies out there that are showing that no, there's not any more significance in boys versus girls. We just a lot of times see boys receiving the diagnosis earlier or even just receiving it altogether because teachers notice a little early on that the little boys are a little bit more rambunctious with it. It's hard for them. They don't know why, and so they act out. They want to be the class clown. It doesn't say that girls can't be that way. It's just research shows that that's typically why boys are being identified a little bit more. But there is no prevalence. Someone with dyslexia cannot perform well in school. Again, that ties up to that very first one, that smart people can't be dyslexic. It's actually the exact opposite. Most children with dyslexia are not only of average intelligence, but they're very bright. And really bright in one area most often. They have an area that they truly excel at. They do very well in school, it's just hard. They work really hard to do so. Maybe they're working late at night on that homework because it's harder, but they actually often do very well. There are no signs of difficulties prior to the child entering school. Again, that's a very common misconception, and we'll get into next what are some of those red flags and what are those signs about how it can be detected a little earlier. So what are we looking for? Who's at risk? Again, family history. If you know you have dyslexia, or an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, a huge red flag that's to be aware, to really watch out for some of these things. A late talker, 2.5. They're not talking, and so the receptive language piece, that means they're understanding everything you're telling them. Go get your shoes, do this. They're able to follow directions, and they're understanding everything, but they're not talking yet at 2.5. I know I've had a family member and a very close friend say to me, Johnny's not talking. He's just stubborn. He'll do it when he wants to. That's not so. If they're not talking by 2.5, something's going on, and that's not only a red flag for language concerns, but for future risk of dyslexia. That ties into those significant speech and language delays. So maybe your child is talking a bunch and just saying so much, but you can't understand any of it. And so it's not really the expressive language piece in the sense of that they're not speaking, it's that they're talking a lot and you can't understand. That's another red flag. Chronic ear infections. Children that have had significant amount of ear infections, think about that as when you have a cold, or right when you first take off in an airplane and before your ears really pop, and how you hear things and just how everything sounds like you're in a well. Children with chronic ear infections, that's what they hear in those first few very important months and years of life, when they should be hearing all these sounds and hearing them very clearly. So they're not hearing things clearly, they're not hearing them accurately, and that's, again, putting them at risk. Directionality confusion. So if you have a child that is still confusing left and right, you've given them the clue, like this is left, they just can't get it, and they're well beyond second grade, again, that's another red flag. Difficulty telling time, same thing. You've taught it at home, their teacher's saying, we have gone over this so many times, and they're still not getting it. I know recently there are a lot of parents saying, well, they're not exposed to anything but a digital clock. So why would they know how to do this? Again, if you're teaching it and they're not easily grasping it, it's another red flag. Mixed hand dominance or lack thereof by 4 years of age. If they're still tossing that pencil around, even at home using their spoon or their fork or picking up their drink from the table, if that's not consistent and they don't just definitely have that hand dominance, that's another red flag. So what are some more? Again, learning to speak. I say this so many times because I often hear of just, it's okay, they'll talk when they want to, but it's dyslexia, again, back to that definition, it's a breakdown in the phonological component of language. So if there is a language difficulty, I highly recommend really looking into that. Learning letters and their sounds. They're in kindergarten, we're in January now, still having a tough time. First grade, and still it's not automatic. That's a red flag. Organizing written and spoken language. So what that means is it's not just writing down a paragraph and being able to fluently write down your thoughts for an essay, but even the spoken language. If your child or someone if they're trying to talk to you and you know that you understood all the words were clear. So it wasn't that it was a problem with, say, speech, like they can't say the speech sound, but at the end of what they say, you're just like, what was that? I got something about you went to the playground today. and someone was there, and I heard all your words, but I'm still not really sure what you said, that's that organization piece. Like if they just can't put it together in a fluent manner for it to be easily understood. Memorizing number facts. Those kids who are starting to learn multiplication tables and just, it's a struggle, it's hard. It's another red flag. Reading quickly enough to comprehend. A child that may read fluently, so they're reading all the words correctly in the passage, but at the end of the passage you ask them what they've read and they don't have a clue. They're spending so much time and energy decoding those words that they're not knowing what they're saying and what it's meaning in the passage. They're just trying to decode the word. Comprehending longer reading assignments, same thing. They may be fine for a short passage, but then they start using more and more energy, and so they start to lose the comprehension piece. Same thing for spelling, learning a foreign language, and even correctly doing math operations. Children with dyslexia really have difficulties with sequencing and a lot of things that go into just even correctly doing the math operation. May not enjoy looking or following print, so you want to sit down and read a book, and even at an early age. So this is where I'm talking about getting into maybe some of those early warning signs. A 4-year-old that just does not want to look at that book, already having that aversion to the print. An older child that is fine if you read it, but does not want to look at something with a lot of words. Again, the alphabet, learning the names and the letters in their name. Again, that's another red flag. Nursery rhymes. Maybe you, every night before you go to bed, you sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and child really just struggles to sing along, just really struggles to know the words and remember the words. Shapes and colors, persistent mixing up of sounds, and I add in here multisyllabic words. Because I know I'm even guilty as a parent with small children of thinking it's very cute when they kind of make up their own word to a very difficult word to say, aminal or piscetti, or my favorite kids, it's bomb for bottom. Like it's just different things of mixing up those sounds a little bit. It's very typical for a common word and a one letter. But as you get into more multisyllabic words and they just really struggle, they cannot, like you can just see the effort in their face. Again, we're going back to that language component and difficulty. Letter sound correspondence, slow, choppy reading, they're just guessing. Reversals, again, we talked about this, letters and numbers, whole words, up until 2nd grade, that's very typical. That's just them still learning and it's developmental. Beyond 2nd grade, they're still having trouble with that B, D, P, or Q. We would be concerned at that point. Messy room or backpack. I know a lot of times when I say this to a group of classroom teachers or even parents, and they're like, well, yes, that's every child. Like, they're messy. But the difference being not just the difference of I don't want to do that right now, but maybe you send them to their room to clean up and they're in there for an hour and you can tell they've worked really hard, but there's still no organization to it. It's still a mess. Again, it's that organization piece, sequential piece they really struggle with. Just dreading going to school because it's hard. So, dyslexia is the most common cause for reading and writing difficulties. Of the people with poor reading skills, 70 to 80% of them are dyslexic, and 20% of the population, or 1 in 5 people, are said to have dyslexia. Again, that affects the same as male, females. About 3/4 of children showing early difficulties with those basic reading skills can overcome those difficulties. So, having said that, how is it diagnosed? It's not something that can be easily diagnosed, and I'm going through this really quickly just because I know that oftentimes I've run into where I hear that, it's just, I can do this screener and I can tell you if child has dyslexia. It's not the case. It's a very detailed process, and it's a very difficult process that needs to be done by someone who has some training. So speaking of that, who is qualified to give a diagnosis of dyslexia? Right now, research has shown that it can fall under 2 categories, a developmental psychologist or educational psychologist with the experience. A speech-language pathologist, again, with the experience. But a true Academic language evaluation, because again, we're looking at the academics, we're looking at the language, should include up to this many assessments. I would be very concerned if it did not. To make the diagnosis, we're looking at, is there just an overall learning disability? Is learning just hard? Do they have adequate intelligence? Again, because we have to prove to diagnose dyslexia that they're capable of learning, but there's a breakdown somewhere and there's a difficulty somewhere. They've been provided the opportunity to learn. So that's why there's that common misconception that you can't diagnose dyslexia too early. A 5-year-old or a 6-year-old that hasn't received a full year of formal instruction, it's not that it's not possible to diagnose, it's very hard because to make the diagnosis of this big hallmark piece, you have to prove they've had the opportunity to learn. That the problems were from factors within the individual. So again, we're looking at that neurological piece, that genetic piece, if we know that there's a family history. Then just all the difficulties in those pieces we have already talked about. So how do we help? What does effective reading instruction look like? It's structured, it's sequential, it teaches the basic phonics concepts necessary for reading. We really strengthen that visual perception and teach those phonetic rules. Multisensory structured literacy teaching. Research shows that this method is what is best for children with dyslexia. That we're teaching phonology, phonological awareness, sound symbol associations, syllable instruction, morphology, syntax, and semantics. We're using multisensory techniques. It's kinesthetic, it's tactile, visual, auditory. They're getting it from different modes. Children with dyslexia have trouble. We don't know which mode they're going to really grasp onto and really going to get it best. So we need to give it to them in all the modes. It's systematic, cumulative, it's very direct, synthetic, analytic, and diagnostic. So what are those targets? What are we really looking at in those very early pre-readers? We want alphabet knowledge, letter knowledge, just knowing the different letters. Their print knowledge, knowing that there are rules, a period means something. Words and sentences, it means something. It's not all just there for no reason. Phonological awareness, that's the very simplest form. Really to be able to divide words into syllables, generating those rhyming words, matching words and beginning sounds. This is something that you can do as early as 3 with kids. I know mine loved at an early age to play a game in the kitchen where I'd say, I see a pot. And at first they were like, you see what, Mom? Like, just didn't really care. And then they'd be, oh, a pot. And then it became a game, like who could get it first? Rhyming, saying pot, hot. And I would just go through rhyming words, and then they caught on and they love it. They love making rhyming words to this day. Vocabulary, we read to learn, so therefore that's why it's a secondary consequence of having dyslexia, is you start to see vocabulary decrease. But if we give more vocabulary early, we can really help with that they know the word, they can use the word. So as we really get into that emergent literacy, what does it look like then? Phonemic awareness, that's that deeper level of phonological awareness, ability to really isolate those sounds and move those sounds around in words to change words. Phonics is learning the sound symbol relationships necessary to decode the words. So again, I think those sometimes can get confusing, so I like to put them up there together. What is the difference? Phonological awareness in its purest form doesn't involve any print. Phonics does. So I throw this in because this is just kind of the hierarchy of what you need to build to become an efficient reader. It's starting here and moving the way up. If you start way up there and you don't have this, you're going to struggle. It's going to be hard. Maybe you can get this, and it doesn't mean you can't work on them at the same time, but until you have this foundation, this piece is not going to be fluent and accurate. So that takes us right into fluency. It has to be accurate. It has to be quick. If it's not, it's going to be slow. It's going to be guesses, and they're not going to comprehend. These are just different ways to increase fluency. Read it together. Making sure they're noting that punctuation. You stop at a period, you change your intonation for an exclamation point. Reading, that's part of that reading with expression. It means something, not just monotone and very flat. The comprehension piece, it's just being able to use, define, discuss, talk about it, go back and reread. Understand all the words and be able to use them in a variety of different ways so that they don't depend on just the context of one story to understand a word, but they can get it in many different contexts. So to build comprehension, asking questions, being able to answer the questions, using them in sentences so that you really know they understand the word, drawing it out, explaining it. So writing goes hand in hand with the phonics instruction. If they really struggle with that, they're going to struggle with their writing skills too. So, just saying this is taken from the American Pediatric Journal, just saying to be very cautious of those false claims that it can be cured and that it can be cured quickly. It is a process and it is difficult. And again, like we said, because of its nature, it can't be cured. We can just decrease the difficulty from it to help make the individual successful. So what is Orton-Gillingham? I know that's the biggest thing. Like, what is this? Why is Orton-Gillingham so wonderful? So Orton-Gillingham is a term that was taken from research and the techniques by Dr. Orton. He used these multisensory techniques in a mental health clinic back in the 1920s. He then teamed with Anna Gillingham and Bessie Stillman, and they based their teachings on the alphabetic method that they used, and that's where we got Orton-Gillingham. And there are many programs that incorporate these methods and principles. So what it is, and I think the biggest misconception is that it's like a set, like, oh, I'm going to go physically get Orton-Gillingham. And it's not, it's a method. So there are lots of different programs that meet this method. So how can we do this at home? What are some different ideas? Being patient and supportive. Kids are going to have off days. They're going to probably break down at home. They're going to hold it together and work so hard while they're at school, and then when they get home, it's going to be hard. So knowing the difference between, not ever having an on day or an off day, but knowing when it's truly an off day and just being supportive and giving them that little brain break. Reading aloud with them every day. Even with older kids, as they allow it, it's very beneficial because, again, that vocabulary piece. Even them just understanding, maybe there's a text or the news that they would love to read to be able to have conversations with peers, but they can't, and it's hard, and so they miss out on that. So reading with them, having them follow along, having them read a sentence, you read a sentence, talking about it so that you're making sure they're comprehending. Letting your child be an expert. So what that means is there is an area that every one of us really excel at. We're all good at it. And as a parent, you know what that is. So letting them be the expert where that's concerned. Maybe they like to really cook. And even though it makes the kitchen a mess, you just let them. Let them cook and let them teach you about it, even if maybe they're not really that good yet, but they feel good at it. Just letting them do that and having something they feel good at so to boost that confidence. Starting a dialogue just so that they know it's okay. It's hard and it's okay. I'm smart. Helping them figure it out. Figure out what does help them learn best. What does make it easier for them. And just keeping it fun because it's hard. It's very hard. And if it's not fun and they dread it, it just makes it a lot worse. So just trying to keep it as fun as possible when it does become hard. So for little ones, reading nursery rhymes and rhyming stories and really calling attention to it, not just reading through it, but really calling attention to those pieces that rhyme, talking about it. Oh, these words sound the same at the end. What's another word? Pausing to see if they can give it to you, then giving it. Separating words into syllables, like I said, really breaking it up and seeing in the car, if you're on a long car drive, to prevent the, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Maybe having them pick out an object they see and giving it to you or you doing it back to them. It's kind of a different form of I Spy. Separating out the syllables when you leave. So saying like, oh, so the first sound in the word app. So really drawing it out so that they hear it and picking out another sound. Oh, this word starts with M too, and really drawing it out. So what are we doing here? Because I know that's a very big question. What does this look like in Shawnee Mission? Again, like Jackie said, I am one, and I haven't had the ability to be at every building. But I do know what this looks like in some of my buildings. Not just special ed, gen ed, that tier 2, those reading specialists are getting in there. They have whiteboards. I see some with sand, some with salt. I saw someone just the other day that it was fabulous. I would have never thought of it. They were writing on the table and then cleaning it up. And I thought, oh my goodness, like, is that going to come off? But it did, and the kids loved it. They thought it was the best thing ever. They're very systematic. They're going through a lesson, and I see it. And then I come back the next time, and someone will say, actually, this occurred when I was teaching this lesson last week. Do you care if I do it again so you can watch this? Because this was kind of interesting to me. And I see them go back. So that systematic piece, very direct. I'm seeing them one-on-one, groups of 2, groups of 3. They're asking me continuously, look at this diagnostic piece. Like, we've done this. What's this looking like? Why is it looking like this? What do we do next? These are videos that I think, if you have time, would be very beneficial for you if you have an older child. The Hbo Documentary is sometimes hard to find, but it's wonderful. It's a 3-part series. It follows famous people with dyslexia, some not famous, some are just your average person that has gone on to be very successful. And it talks about their feelings and their thoughts about when they didn't know, and then once they found out what was going on, and just some of the different things that help them go on and be successful. These are my references. A lot of even more detail and within those articles if you have any interests. But that's all I have. So thank you guys for being such a wonderful audience. Buildings. I've been in a few. Brookwood, Prairie, Blue Jacket, Flint. I'm going to leave some off. Corinth, Trail Ridge, Mill Creek, Apache. Again, I'm probably leaving some off that I've been in and out of in the list.
I'm not sure who the question's directed at, but what type of resources specifically designed for dyslexic teaching methods are available? In my experience, is not available for gen ed students, and it is available for kids with IEPs, and obviously not all dyslexic kids are getting IEPs. We bought some at our school through individual parents, and the principals found some, but I would love to see that.
So again, I'm not familiar with every building, but the question is what to meet that.
Those district-wide resources, and then my understanding too is the gen ed programs, at least that we had access to, and the IEP were not the same program. So if they switched between an IEP and non-IEP, they were switching. And I don't really care whether it's Wilson or whatever, but I just wanted to be consistent. I'm curious about that.
There is no consistency right now, and that's being very candid with you. I'm not fully aware that there's much difference between what special ed has as compared to what gen ed has. I'm not buying specific materials for dyslexic students.
I just know my child was told that she could not have access when she did not have the IEP, and she does now that she does have an IEP.
Okay. That is something that when we do the Institute this summer that's going to help us a lot, is that they don't know what to ask for. Actually, one of the very first things Stacy did in August when she started with the 6 schools that she's with was she asked the principals if she could go in and basically raid their closets to see what they had. And they weren't special ed closets, they were just the resources that were in the building, to know what they had and to show them how they could use what they already had in place. So I don't, again, I'm in charge of special ed. I work with the C&I department in collaboration. Stacy is actually meeting on a regular basis with our reading specialists to help assist them and train them as well with the resources.
Very good idea.
I'm all for that. Is that just in the schools you're assigned to?
No, she's meeting with all the reading specialists. And in Shawnee Mission now, our reading specialists can have a lot of different names. Sometimes they're called instructional specialists. Sometimes they're called innovation specialists. Sometimes they're called reading specialists. It just depends. Some of it depends upon the funding that the building has. But she works with them. They all do meet on a regular basis, and Stacy meets with them and is giving them the ideas. I think that right now what we are focusing on, and Stacy, you're going to correct me, is that it's not so much the actual physical materials or resources, but being sure, and go back to my very favorite slide.
So the most important piece is knowing this.
And it has to be
Yes.
It does need to be
and all
multi-sensory.
that. And I
Oh.
do understand that, and I was working with our reading teacher trying to educate them with that, but they were stuck using like the Wonders curriculum.
Right.
And part of it is going back in and scanning the paragraph after you read it to the
Correct.
question. And when I told her that is something that, while an excellent technique for a good reader, it is never going to be good
Right.
for my daughter. She's never going to be able to do that. Can we be doing something else with our time? And I think in part it has to be because they didn't have access to the materials. And part of it, she just didn't know anything about dyslexia.
Correct.
Being a reading specialist. But I think they're working on it, and I
Right.
appreciate the efforts, but I would just love to have access for all the kids.
Agreed. And I think that's what we're going to strive for after we get everybody on the same page through this institute. One of the things that we really focus on, and that Stacy focuses on, and Stacy did say when she was doing her presentation that it's okay to teach the skills up higher on the trend line. However, until you've got those basics, and that's what all the box curriculums really stress when they say it's a structured approach, is that they start with the things in the low end and build on to them. And so that's what she's really working with.
So- That's back to this slide is understanding. So this first part's that hierarchy, or just knowing what needs to be taught when. So that's the first part. What needs to be taught, in what order does it need to be taught? Truly understanding that first. The next piece is, again, that multisensory. We're giving it to them. It needs to then be structured. It's not just don't start way up here. Again, like Jackie said, and like I've said, you can teach simultaneously, but until you get this foundation, it's still going to be hard. So making sure that it's understood and known that there is a method to it, and the diagnostic piece to that is that's helping you understand where do you start. You don't just pull from anything. Where do you start? What skills are missing? And where do we go next? What's the order in which it needs to be taught?
So if a student is officially diagnosed later, like 5th grade or 6th grade, then place will help direct the school on where to, in that hierarchy, where to begin instruction?
Quality.
Intervention type instruction?
Quality testing, yeah, should.
Okay.
Yes, and one of the things Stacy is helping the buildings understand is what that testing really means. Okay, and
How to look
use
at
the
it.
testing to figure out what to do, how to do those things.
So.
Is that the testing that you do to prepare for an IEP, or?
I don't do testing here.
Stacy doesn't do testing for us, and so.
No, I'm thinking like at the school level, you come in and you say, my child has dyslexia, and they're saying, well, we really don't think you really should qualify for an IEP, so let's just put this other thing in place, and we'll do a couple little tests here, but there's nothing comprehensive. Is that,
Well, now, I know in our situation, we gave provided our diagnosis of the dyslexia, and then the school, the district psychologist had to test to see that she received a similar answer of dyslexia. Are you saying you did not have that, or, okay, because I think that's the quality testing they're talking about, is when the psychologist goes in and does some.
that's what I'm saying, how do they know our schools what they're supposed to do?
So if you come in with testing of that nature, then we child with a disability. And please note that dyslexia is a medical diagnosis, and I'm going to speak to the choir. I see a lot of people shaking their heads. It is not an automatic because you have a diagnosis of dyslexia that you're going to qualify for an IEP. I wish I could make that different, but that's the law.
Yeah, and I completely understand.
Okay,
that.
and so, when, depending upon what's going on, and you know this, every case is an individual, if you come in and your child is displaying certain behaviors such that they believe your child really has an IDEA disability, meaning the special ed law disability, then we may add on to the testing that you bring to us, or we may do other testing to determine if the child qualifies for an IEP. Stacy, I don't want to overstep. It does, to get the diagnosis, it requires an extensive evaluation like you're saying.
Mhm.
But what we're also working on right now is the general testing, the DIBELS testing that all kids in our school district get. Name some more tests. I'm going dead.
There are a few different ones. There's a CTOP.
Yeah.
They use the CTOP in the district.
We have test results right now available to us that we do for all students that we can use to help determine some of this at an early age. And that's what Stacy's doing in the SEPTA process, is teaching teaching teachers, teaching reading specialists, teaching everyone how to read the test scores to know what to do with them. Christine?
So with early screening, doing the DIBELS testing and looking at MAP scores, what do you see long-term for like identifying these kids earlier than like the 5th grader, the 7th grader, the 8th grader?
You can answer first, I'll follow up. You have-
That's my area of interest as far as my research right now. What I'm very interested in with getting my doctorate is figuring out that early diagnostic piece and what to do about it. So
when we met with the principals in the buildings that Stacy's working in, okay, and before she ever stepped foot in the building, and the message from me was, this isn't about special ed. She is here to work with your non-identified students through the SIP process to start screening and determining children that are having reading difficulties. As Stacy's already indicated, the research shows the sooner you start intervening, then those children very well may never need an IEP, and that's my goal.
ideally, with being able to reach out to more buildings and more professionals, just making that awareness of this is what it looks like. So, they know that the kid that's still struggling to spell their name with shapes and colors, that's a red flag that something is going on. And being able to know, like, okay, here's that list of things, here's what I'm looking for, here's another list of things to help really get going with. Because when we talk about the diagnosis, we think, especially early on, like, what's the most important? Is it to know that that's what it is in kindergarten, or to start treating? And so to really be able to know this is what we're looking for, this is how we need to start treating it, is where we hope to be going.
I appreciate the effort, but for those of us who have kids that, realistically, the processes are being put in place, is there some form similar to what you're going to do this summer that you can hear the frustrations and the issues that we've encountered? Because even though we may have a very valid diagnosis from Children's Mercy, or in all of these other issues, we're still struggling to get an acknowledgement of even a 504. So just because they're working so hard to stay on grade level, we're still hearing, but they're doing so well. That's not good enough. That's absolutely not good enough. So, as far as getting together to say, I want someone to hear what we are doing, because in my situation, my daughter's at Melinda, and there were 7 girls in our kindergarten class. 4 of them have a diagnosis of dyslexia that has been vetted through Children's Mercy. All 4 of us go through different venues to do our own work. Because while they'll make accommodations in the classroom, they're not helping teach them differently in the classroom. And that's the issue that is missing. And I understand, my goodness, I'm a social worker. I understand. You have to have all the information you need to be able to make a big paradigm shift. But you need to get this piece so that you can have our input and what we're doing as well, because it doesn't matter if a handful of schools are being touched, which I appreciate, that at least that's a start. We need everybody to listen, to say, okay, if truly 20% of the population is being impacted by this, why isn't there, I mean, there are 4 fourth grade classes in my daughter's school. Why isn't one of them being taught differently?
So, unfortunately, even though there's been a lot of changes to the special ed law over all the years since in the early 70s, special ed and even 504
And she's not in special ed
I
at all.
know, is a wait to fail process.
Absolutely.
Okay? I don't like it, okay? But, so when you're dealing with folks in the buildings, are people that are waiting for children to fail because that's all they know.
But in Kansas,
I know. And so what we need to do is we need to be sure that our buildings understand you have a problem whether you're failing or not.
but in Kansas, isn't it still law that you have to put children who are advanced and need special ed because they are advanced, they get some special attention as well. Kansas has one of the few laws in the books.
You mean the
that
children
show-
that are exceptional in the
Yes.
eighth grade? Okay, I hear what you're saying.
So the issue is, so many of these kids would still qualify in that area, but they're still struggling to be able to read a first grade book.
I'm not.
I understand, you gotta hear, this is what all of us are dealing with as well. I understand you guys are dealing with a different set of issues, because you're trying to change it from another side. I just wanna make sure, and I was really hoping this was gonna be more directed at, what resources do we have to apply today? We can go through all the outside tutoring, we can, but that's just adding an extra layer of, an extra obstacle on, they complete a full day of school, and then they go and work again, So we have to acknowledge that's an issue.
I'm curious,
She's really had her hand up. You're next, but she's been very patient. Okay.
I'm curious about what we're doing, or the district is doing to educate the upper grades as well, the teachers. So our children who were diagnosed late, super waited to fail, now we're having the IEP, we're working really hard. But we're gonna be entering high school with teachers that are like, oh, you're just lazy, and those are words this child has heard, and it's terrifying as a parent to think, I'm gonna put this kid who we've been working really hard to bring back up from the whole elementary experience, which was wonderful, but failure. And then move into a high school where teachers don't even know what dyslexia is. And that's terrifying as a parent. And I'm wondering what the district is doing for professional education for the high school and the middle school teachers.
I know I'm giving this same presentation in February, and it's a district-wide professional development day. So I hope there are upper grade level teachers there, but I know that it's there. So I hope that they sign up, and my hope would be to just keep at that with the awareness.
Do they have to sign up to attend?
It's a professional development.
Yeah.
Day.
Yeah.
They
Is
have
there
options.
anything that we're doing for these high school teachers so they know what the word is? And know what these kids, what they're coming into their classroom, there's a lot of them, they're not cured. And we have accommodations, we have the IEP, but not all the kids have that.
An avenue that we can work through is the new PLC process that goes on at the high schools where you have your late start days, and we can go around and do training but those are content level meetings, but we can access people that way as well. What we need to do is get somebody in each building that has because schools in this district, and it's hard to get, we don't have 53 consultants. So this lady over there, thank you.
The legal aspect. You legally can't treat dyslexia, okay? And you use the word treat, and that's because this is a huge concern. How does the district plan
program. We are working through our reading specialist, through our intervention specialist, through our instructional specialist, to give them the skill set to work with students that are not identified as special ed. If a child with dyslexia qualifies for special ed, they can qualify under a number of different categories. There is not, the federal government or the state of Kansas has a dyslexia diagnosis, but they could fall under the category of a learning disability. They could also fall under the category of other health impaired. So it's not that we can't treat, it's just what mode we're going to do. And as I was trying to say, it doesn't take an IEP to get help with dyslexia, and that's where the district is headed. Yes, go ahead, Stacy, call.
I don't know if this will help or anything, but I am a teacher in a building that we have had Stacy as a consultant. I've taught for 35 years, and I've learned more in the last 3 months because I had a misconception. Because I hadn't had the training, but I really do kind of believe I have students in my class that do have an IEP with dyslexia, but I also have some that have had the diagnosis and don't. So I do think it's a good beginning. It's not the end answer, but I feel like I am doing a better job even after 35 years of trying to help the students that don't have an IEP, because now I know a little bit about how to do that. So, yeah, and then, I don't know, it's just a beginning, but I do feel like I'm better equipped, so therefore I hope that I can.
And that's our goal, is to get the regular ed teachers better equipped as well.
Is there any sort of planning so that at least the reading specialists in the buildings or people who are teaching English, I guess in the upper grades, that they can be, I don't know, mandated but required to undergo Orton-Gillingham teaching? Or, because I know that there are trainings available, I don't know if that's in the works or.
So what Stacy explained to you is, this is Orton-Gillingham right here. So that's what we're working on. I explained to you that she's meeting with the reading specialist on a regular basis, okay? We're offering this institute in the summer. So we are trying to reach out to all those people to be sure they have the knowledge, similar to what this fourth grade teacher has just explained to you all, is that in 3 months she's learned more. We're working. That's fine. But that's what we're trying to do.
I'm coming here because I'm actually excited that a school district is doing this. So I applaud you. I think it's awesome.
You've really been happy to get up.
I'm a grandma.
Okay?
I had a son 30 years ago that was diagnosed with dyslexia. He never got help. Now my grandson has dyslexia. My daughter had to pay for 3 years of tutoring. There's a breakdown somewhere. Why does she have to pay for outside tutoring and the school should be helping this child? Something needs to be put in place for these kids.
And we understand that, and that's what we're trying to do.
She's had her hand up for a long time.
Okay, so we're just kind of in the beginning, don't have a dyslexia diagnosis, but have had all the similar frustrations. My son's been in speech for 7 years. Plus, he had an IEP. They graduated him from his IEP. And, I've been tutoring him at home, basically, is what we do. I tell him to just bring his homework home. And that's worked, but it doesn't work on math testing. On math testing, he's lost. And so I have an A and B student who tests really poorly, which I'm okay with because I'm not a huge fan of standardized testing, except for the fact that he's headed into middle school and he's been told that he does not get any electives because of his math test. So they did not take into consideration that he works hard, he has to work at home a lot. And so I'm I'll probably end up homeschooling him, so we're going to end up pulling out. And I just don't know where to start. I don't know, I was told I can't argue with that it's mandated that they go off the math testing, but he's burning out and he's discouraged. And this is a kid who works harder than average, and he's maintained in Stuco. He's a very involved student. He tries really hard, and gets all A's and B's, but we do the homework together, and he really needs that extra attention. And so before I proceed, I'm not sure what the next step is, if I go privately to get a diagnosis, but it sounds like a diagnosis isn't really going to help in regards to district.
We're not fielding questions right now in the group to answer individual. Why don't
you seek me out, and I've got some answers for you.
Perfect.
Go ahead, Stacy.
Oh, okay, over here.
I have questions, and I think everybody has a lot of questions, and we are in process right now of getting assessed, and I'm certain with things, but even you said you're a blender, we are too, and I see how much, how hard it is for the school board because everything that you're faced with, and then with the families too, and I think our sense of urgency and like, we want it done now because we're the ones out and seeing it, and you guys are doing everything you can only do so much at one time. And obviously there's a breakdown we are dealing with, when it comes home every day that it's like then affecting their behavior and then it affects, there's so much I could go on and it's like just, I can't help but get like infuriated and not in a bad way, just I want to help, I want to fix this, and I think a lot of parents do, and why can't we, like at each school, or why can't there be a way that the parents, because I guarantee you that you're only at 6 schools, is it? Like, okay, the parents will do the work, like, why can't we, as a school, or there's some way we set up so it's a collaborative approach and get things done faster than it's a us versus you, and just, it's not helping anybody anywhere. And, I mean, it needs to be a collaborative approach, and people need to be able to see both sides of the story and respect that, and just be able to understand from both sides while making progress for the child, because everybody wants, both sides want to do
So,
best.
I don't know why I haven't thought of this earlier. I'm talking about training instructional specialists, I'm talking about training reading specialists, blah, blah, blah. Our school district administrators,
Yes.
our building administrators need to understand it because they're the keepers of making things change in their buildings.
Yes.
So, that's my next thing on my agenda.
She's had her hand up back here for a while.
I understand a lot of the information presented in regards to identifying and diagnosing and getting that understanding of what these signs are. Once we have our students in these education programs that are established, how are we assessing those programs to make sure that they're right for that student and individualizing that to the point that it's actually being successful?
Yes, so that goes back to exactly what I think we've touched on, but not specifically to answer that question. And me going into each building, and that very first week, month, it was just getting in there, what materials are there, helping the educators in that building understand how to look at the data to find out, okay, first, where is the breakdown? Once they find the breakdown, helping them understand their materials. So that it's not, I have all these resources, but I'm not sure which is the best for this or this.
Just throwing those in that.
Yeah.
So you're working on that.
Yes. And that's a huge piece of that this summer, that intervention piece that we're going to do in program.
The other follow-up question is there going to be a training that you kind of alluded to train us as parents? I know you're doing all this within the school, but we also need to be armed as parents to come alongside.
I just have a completely quick question. I know you're making all these things with the teachers and such. Has there been anything in discussion about offering some type of summer school program for our kids who do have the dyslexia? Because it seems like once May ends, we have to kind of like piecemeal it. And I know kids have 6 weeks, and then after that 6 weeks, they start losing information. So I don't know if there was any kind of talks of, an old-fashioned summer school type of.
No, there hasn't. There hasn't, but that doesn't mean there couldn't be.
I was gonna say, if there's a way, I think that would be very helpful, especially.
Okay.
Mine's kind of like, we're in the beginning, we have a first grader, so young, going through all this, and we do want to start with the thing, we do stuff at home, I'm a teacher, and I will vouch that I haven't been teaching since my son's been out, but through communication, the teachers this brought to the attention of the young, my kid is going to get this diagnosis early in intervention. I'm grateful the teachers know about it. I look back at some of these students I had, and I'm like, oh my God, if I would have known this, I would have done it so differently. So it is beginning, it is a start, you know, and I do appreciate that. But, and there's a lot of holes, I get it, but I do stay home and I'm willing to do I've looked at different programs like Messy and different, is there some way that you have ones down that you would like recommend, or, you know, I don't think tutor like Sylvan and stuff is really for, right, see, so is there specific resources besides me just going and getting sand and coming up with my own brainstorm to do, like?
My favorite resource is the International Dyslexia Association's website, because if you go there under parents, that's where I got the bulk of this information. And it's really just, again, educating what needs to be taught, and then knowing your child and knowing where the breakdown is, because there are, a lot of wonderful programs, but again, there's not one perfect one out there. If there was, every place would use it. So they all have holes.
For like, you know, that 4 hour testing or whatever, will they kind of help me narrow things down?
No.
So there's nobody, it's just me kind of finding it on my own. That's what you're all saying.
Again, so use that resource, because there's a great resource on there of helping you understand this, and then showing all those millions of programs, and it will show you where the holes are in all of them. There's a chart.
Hi, I'm just wondering about accommodations offered to dyslexic students. I have a kid at Horizon Academy right now with dyslexia, and he'll be transitioning out in a year or two, and I just don't know, like, if Shawnee Mission offers, like, extended test times, or talk to text, or, you know, the programs that read the books aloud, or things like that. I'm wondering if any of those.
I've been a part of a lot of those meetings, but that starts with the building principal, so find out your building principal would be my advice.
Just my suggestion to you is, if you know when you're going to be making that transition, don't wait until the first week of the school year to meet. Do it like the spring before. Okay.
But yes.
Have Horizon Academy write out like what works, because the school a lot of
And I like to tell parents that a quality accommodation plan is kind of like adjusting a medication. It's not always the best right out of the gate. It's especially when you have an older child, it's really having them tell you, this worked, this didn't work, and revisiting, talking about, again, that dialogue. Oh, hold on, because you're I
was just wondering about, so I'm hearing all these questions, and then I'm having follow-up questions to that. So back to this middle school question, I'm just thinking about, I know Jackie, and you guys are in this beginning stages and you're piloting 6 schools, but to look at those kids that have been missed, you know, in middle school, my son luckily had 3 years of tutoring outside, so he made through middle school just fine, but there's so many kids that didn't get that intervention, and so now they're in middle school and they have to do that reading skills class, and they're in all co-taught classes, and then that sets them up for high school being in all these menial levels classes, but their intelligence is way up here. So just going forward, I mean, what's your thoughts?
I think that I feel like I'm like throwing you off with this answer, and that's not what I'm trying to do.
I'm with you.
I think you need to continue to advocate and help them understand. Again, we have a job of educating our staff, letting them know that children with dyslexia are not lazy. They maybe have some attention problems, but that doesn't mean they're lazy. That they are very smart, and that just because they have a reading problem doesn't mean that they can't access the things that they need. So I'm going to tell you, as I'm trying to do my thing, and continue to advocate for your child as well.
She touched on it a little bit. It's those kids who got missed. I've got a kid in 2nd grade and 7th grade, so I've got both ends. 2nd grader, just kind of like pushing the boulder up the hill, trying to get this school to actually do this. But I've got a meeting there tomorrow, yet again. I'm like a bad penny for them. Just keep showing up. But for my middle schooler, you know, we just missed the boat, and she's just kind of is where she is in the district, and you can have some accommodations if you push for them, but, you know.
So, again, I'm trying to be as transparent as I can with you. Stacy came early this evening as we're planning for our next steps. Our conversation was, we really have to hit middle
created through the speech and language department at KU in dyslexia is going to focus on early intervention, early identification, developing a screening tool that I hope Shawnee Mission gets to pilot. We do have a lot of children. Christina,
you're going to identify a lot, and
yeah.
you don't do
There's a
anything
lot.
to help
I
them
know.
with it.
I'm running into right now students with families that I've been working with that were 5th grade last year, 6th grade this year, and it's like, what are we going to do next year? Because the middle schools don't have the specialists like the elementary schools do.
But I will say for mine, which is Trailridge, they may not know what accommodations do, but they have been very collaborative.
Yeah.
So it's, they're going to lay it out for you.
So we have just like maybe 10 minutes left to when we're going to be done. Does anybody have any more burning questions? I wish that I could, I so wish I could give you concrete black and white answers. I just don't have them. You raised your hand and left and came back.
Yeah, so you mentioned at the very beginning that you're going to train one staff member per building this summer, is what you're going
The goal is at least one.
Is that just elementary, or is that all schools?
No, we're going to do all schools.
Are you training them on how to teach like the Orton-Gillingham method or the Wilson method, or what specifically is that?
So again, there are a lot of great programs out there. The problem is they all miss something. We have a fabulous teacher at an elementary school that I've been fortunate enough to work with, and she is the best at picking out, this one doesn't do this, this one has missed phonological awareness. Even meeting with people who are doing the private tutoring saying, yeah, this one missed this one. So the goal is to start with that they know what needs to be first, that they can identify where the child has a deficit by looking at the data and not just having all these scores and not knowing what to do with it. That they can identify, here's the deficit. They can then identify what is best to treat that and knowing just how it needs to be done.
What data are you looking at besides DIBELS?
If the child has any testing from the outside, looking at that.
So unless a parent goes outside and gets testing or requests a comprehensive evaluation, really it's just DIBELS?
And you can see a lot from that. Yeah.
Each building does a little
So in the Tier 2 intervention, so that's your reading specialists, they're using a lot of quick phonics screeners, which it has the name quick in it because it's not a lengthy standardized test, but it gives a lot of good information. They use the PAST. It's another looking really at all those areas, and it gives a lot of information. And I have not come across a reading specialist yet that's not using that. So, and it gives great information.
Are you touch base with the school psychologists that are doing the screening and all the tests?
Right now, those that I just mentioned, the reading specialists, so that's general education where they're doing those screeners I just mentioned.
But the school psychologists that
So usually when, Maureen, I got it. I promise I'll end, okay? I got it. Usually when we're doing our testing, we're looking at a learning disability, okay? We're not looking at a phonological awareness problem. And so that's where we're working with our school psychologists to broaden what they're doing and not.
Will you explain that a little bit more?
I'm gonna let her explain.
What am I explaining?
We're talking more about phonological awareness.
Like if the child is in the process of getting assessed by the school counselor for a specific learning disability, are they aware of what, so I guess what you were saying is, I'm thinking, I'm sure my son has dyslexia, but like is that what they are like looking for?
Probably, Stacy, go ahead.
Yeah.
Probably what I'm trying to explain is, up until probably a short while ago, I'm not even going to give a timeline on it. When we were doing evaluations to determine if the child met eligibility. Okay. What I'm trying to help our school psychologists understand is that we still have that responsibility, but in that process, we also need to get enough information to know how to instruct the child appropriately. And so that's why I'm asking them now to work with their speech pathologist. So when you're looking at a reading disability, you shouldn't just be looking at reading. Maybe we also need to be looking at language and speech type things so we can address phonological awareness, so that when we're done, we really know
where they are in these things, and we can target the correct instruction.
And you feel that the school, if the staff and mental psychologists are instructed, they're able to accurately.
So I'm not going to tell you they're going to give you a diagnosis of dyslexia.
No, I'm not.
Okay, but I am going to tell you, yes, I do.
Okay.
Stacy's already done some in-service training
Yeah.
with our psychologist as well as our speech pathologist. Yes,
And again, I've seen in some of the buildings that being done, so.
If our children have already been assessed, and it's been some time, is there going to be a capacity to have them reassessed so that now with the new tools that the school has available to get down to the bones of what is really where the child has the gaps?
Sure. So are you talking about a child that's already been on an IEP?
Yes.
Okay, so you can always ask for a re-eval at any point in time.
So that they can say, okay, this is the more specific, once they're properly identifying, this is a more specific. I know they will never be able to diagnose, but here are the holes.
Right. So we're really at the end of our time. I'm going to tell you what I heard tonight. Shawnee Mission needs to do more. Okay. I'm going to be real honest with you. I'm tired, and when I hear this woman tell me, or this woman over here tell me that their child's giving up, it makes me very sad. I know that we have a long road to go, and I am more than willing to have more sessions like this for you all. I just don't know if I can always give you the answers, but I'm willing. My mind is spinning. We recorded this session tonight for a totally different reason, but I think maybe it's worthwhile for people besides me to hear what you all had to say. And so I'm going to make an effort to be sure that people that earn more money than I do, it's the easiest way. When you're a district level administrator, you always say people that earn more money than you, that means they have a higher title and more control. And I'm going to be sure I'm sharing it with folks because I want them to know that we have an issue, and we've got some very concerned parents. Christina, probably one of the first times I met her was when she did a presentation at one of our board meetings. I'm not encouraging you to do that. But I am going to encourage you to be sure that your voices are heard. I want to be your avenue for that. Again, many of you in the room are parents that don't have students on IEPs yet, but I don't care if your child's on an IEP. I want to be sure all kids' needs are met. So, are you still doing something with the website or something? Helping? Or are you just doing it through SEPTA? What are you doing?
Okay, so I am a parent of an 8th grade dyslexic, and so I've got multiple hats I wear. But my passion is our Dyslexia Johnson County group. We have a Facebook group. It's Dyslexia Support Group. Dyslexia Support Parents. Help me. I forgot. I will look it up. But Google Dyslexia Support Johnson County, and you're in Facebook, and you're going to find a whole parent support group of parents all throughout Johnson County that are going through this. So you can ask your questions and feel heard and feel like I'm not alone. Secondly, I'm president of Special Education PTA, which is SEPTA, and we work together not just with dyslexia, but that's why I joined, but also to work on spreading knowledge about IEPs, 504s, just getting your questions answered, being able to, Jackie's at every meeting, just being able to have her. I know sometimes she feels a little walled in on her questions, but really we just really value the fact that Jackie's always available to us. She's crying here tonight, so even though
I'm tired. I'm really sorry.
even though we're not getting the answers we may always want, I feel like you are definitely on the right track. But it's not just Shawnee Mission; it's Kansas as well. We're working on trying to get some legislation going in Kansas, so any and all voices to be heard.
So my last message is I want to collaborate with you. This woman, who is an expert, I know had some fear to get in front of a large group of parents that have children with dyslexia when you don't feel your children's needs are being met. I'm a mom of 2 children and a grandmother of 3, and I can be a really bad mama bear sometimes. So I understand when you get upset and you want the best for your children. But it's hard to be, we're trying to do everything we can. I hear you, and it's hard if you're going to attack us because we're not doing enough, because we realize that and we want to do more, and we're in the process of making that happen. I need your support to make it happen too, though. I hope you all realize that.
And we're really glad that the district hired somebody that is a specialist in dyslexia. Finally.
Okay, I'm on the website under special ed. If anybody wants to reach out to me, do. I'm more than willing to have conversations with you. I would like to talk with you before you leave, though, this evening, because I do have some suggestions for you. So everybody have a good night.
Thank you all. I'm going to turn off. Oh, okay.